myself included, have felt kind of awkward inviting someone to a church, but you feel more comfortable inviting them to a home. So that's the principle behind this. And then the idea along with this is that each person within that subgroup, each of those 10 people, can be actively involved. So each person, depending on their skill set, will be able to help with the cooking skills, help with the Bible studies. And if they don't have many skills that can be incorporated, they can be trained. Maybe once a month you can have a training session for this group of 10 people so they can learn how to be involved more actively in these events. And so instead of just knocking on doors, you're doing practical events, using the health message as the entering wedge to reach the people in the community. But there's even a bigger goal, maybe not a bigger goal, but maybe a side goal as well, that each of these subgroups would eventually plant another church. And so then what happens then is you have exponential growth. Because maybe eventually this church will get another 100 people, and then they also have a number of subgroups. And so then in the end, you end up with 6 churches in that community, and a lot of programs happening in that community. And so this is one principle that can be used to reach the community, the polluted world, as illustrated in Elisha's miracle. But another one is the concept of centers of influence. It's one that many of us are familiar with. I'm sure when you hear the phrase center of influence, probably what comes to mind, at least this is from me, is you think of maybe a building down in the city somewhere, and someplace, probably in a town or city. And these can be very effective. I know that in Lebanon, we experienced how effective they were, having 600 people come through in just a week. And Ellen White talks a little bit about this as well, where she says here, in Testimonies to the Church, Volume 8, it is the positive duty of God's people to go into the regions beyond, that forces be set to work to clear new ground, to establish new centers of influence wherever an opening can be found. Rally workers who possess true missionary zeal and let them go forth to diffuse light and knowledge far and near. So this is another way that this principle of reaching the communities can be implemented. But I'd like to take this concept a little bit deeper. When you think about a center of influence, the building in and of itself has no influence at all, right? It's just a building, that's it. It's made up of people. And so in a similar way that atoms make up molecules, the atoms help define the characteristics of that molecule and how it will act, what it will look like, and what it will do. And then people that make up the center of influence also define the characteristics and even how successful that center of influence will be. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the influence that we personally have, how we can be a part of a center of influence. Sometimes it's easy to think that it's just the professionals that are to work in the center of influence. There's not a lot I can do, but there is. Each person can be involved and has an influence. Even if you can't be a part of a center of influence, you can still have an influence on people. 1 Timothy 4:12 says, "Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers in word, in conversation, in charity, in spirit, in faith, and in purity." So that covers pretty much most of it. Basically, everything we do has an influence on someone. And that influence should be a positive one. And what if you think about this? What if every word or every phrase we use had some kind of impact on somebody, an eternal impact? It's true that maybe some things we say don't have too much of an influence, but I believe that many of them do. In Proverbs 15:4 it says, "Gentle tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit." And so positive words can have an eternal impact. The results can bear fruit in the lives of those you speak to, as a tree bears fruit and sustains life. On the contrary then, words spoken to degrade and demoralize breaks the spirit in ways that tear down spirituality. So I'd like to challenge you today. Think about the influence you have. Think about how you can be involved in your church in either establishing a small group or establishing a center of influence and working with that church and being an influence, using the positive influence that you have to influence those around you and to purify the contaminated water in the world around us.